Living a balanced lifestyle doesn't have to be a dream, and wellness doesn't have to be an activity you save for downtime. Instead, elevate your personal and professional life with the tips, tools, and insight to holistically support healthier habits. Join me, Dr. Callie Davis, in the Mind-Body Connection for enlightening conversations, inquisitive panel discussions, and illuminating stories from experts in the medical and healing communities who are leading the movement toward a holistic approach to health. Lauren Gehman, LCSW, is a licensed therapist working with adolescents, adults, and families through the lens of cognitive behavioral therapy and positive psychology. Lauren joined Teach for America after college, where she learned of her love for working to understand what motivates and challenges humans. Following the 2-year commitment, Lauren attended Tulane School of Social Work and later taught as part of the adjunct faculty. She spent 20 years as a school counselor and enjoyed serving as the head of the counseling department for her last 12 years at the school. Lauren created and teaches a positive psychology course with the Global Online Academy, allowing her to work with students worldwide. Along with in-office sessions, Lauren conducts therapy by Lake Pontchartrain through Run, Walk, Talk, which recognizes that being outdoors while jogging or walking can make it easier to access and open up about difficult life circumstances. Lauren believes therapy is a collaborative process, most effective when clients feel empowered to explore how to create and enhance a sense of meaning, purpose, and connection in all areas of living. Tonight, we are welcoming our very special guest, Lauren Gehman. Lauren is here to talk with us about mental health in her practice, in her field, in her teachings, and what she brings into the realm of the mind-body connection. Lauren and I first crossed paths at this time where, as business owners, we were all shrinking away from each other and running away from being in person. But we found that we had opened practice space in the same building. And so we came across each other that way. And then over time, we realized how our practices were so significant to one another. Because as a physical therapist, working with the body and healing conditions like chronic pain, the things that we work with, Lauren on, I don't want to say the other side of things because it's not like they're distinct and separate, but in the realm of mental health, does so much work on the brain, the nervous system, rewiring from trauma, being able to heal and recover and feel like we're living our best lives. So...
Yeah. Kelly, thank you so much for having me. I listening to you talk about how we came to share this space on this floor with Hands on Health and my counseling practice. It has such a good feel to it. And rarely do I walk into this office without like stopping and pausing in the hallway and just noticing that and taking it in. And I hope for our patients and clients it has the same feel to it. But I remember when you were moving in and you set it up so beautifully and warm on the outside, and it just changed what could have been a sterile office space into a place that feels like a community. And so I do feel so grateful to share the space together.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's really important, I think, because I would say you hear it too from our patients whenever they come in. They feel at ease. They feel relaxed.
And they're coming in to do hard work, right?
Yes.
Whether it is healing the body or healing the spirit, it's brave work to do. And so it's so important that the space feel comfortable and welcoming and a sense of we're all here to support each other through it.
Absolutely. That kind of sets the stage, doesn't it, for that hard work to be done, for the process to begin. When counter to a comfortable space, a lot of medical facilities are in that sterile environment that it can feel hard to relax within. So tell us a little bit about one of the mainstays in your practice, which is positive psychology. Let's talk about that.
Yes, I'll back up from the beginning of really kind of diving into this subject matter. But I spent many, many, many years working in a school as part of the counseling department. And one of the opportunities that came up for me while working at the school was to work with a global institute called the Global Online Academy. And I was joined their staff to teach Intro to Psychology, which is, I've taught it forever and ever. It's so much fun to teach. But this particular group of they bring teachers from around the world to teach students from around the world. So it's a really neat time to come together with different cultures and just share the human experience while learning content in one particular subject matter. And it's a creative group. So once I started working with them, I thought like, oh, I want to build a positive psychology class. I want to build it from scratch. I really want to research this. I don't have enough time in my life to research it. And what better way to throw yourself into something than when you have to create something or teach something around it? So I started asking them, like early on in my work with them, I really want to build this class. And they would be, they're very polite. Yes, sure, we'll talk about it later. And a year would go on and I would say it again. We would gather in Seattle on Bainbridge Island in the summers to work on our content for our classes, and I would bring it up again and sure, yeah, let's keep talking. And then something pivotal happened. Lori Santos out of Yale began their happiness class, and it was the most popular class ever taught at that school. And so that next year I came in equipped with this real evidence that people want to learn about this, that students want to learn about it. And from there, I got to launch into a year-long study of building this coursework from them. And naturally, I absorbed it. It became so much about how I think and view the world. And then to hear how my students encountered it and how it changed their lives. And then to get to use it with the clients in this practice has felt so meaningful. And so I feel like it's just every part of the way I think, feel, and behave at this point in life.
That's an amazing story.
It's funny to think back.
Yes, really to see how those threads all came together. And at a moment like in our cultural history where we all started to kind of like tune in to, the human condition and that we're seeking happiness and we're seeking well-being.
Yeah, it's so interesting to consider how the modern day version of positive psychology came to be. We can see traces of it in Eastern philosophy, early religion. In the 1940s, Abraham Maslow and the self-actualization movement. So it's everywhere, right? It's weaved through history of mental health and psychology, but in its more modern version, Martin Seligman out of the University of Pennsylvania made it his life's work to study happiness and what causes people to feel happy. And he, in the 1990s, he had the position of being the president of the American Psychological Association, which is a huge role. You get to do it for 1 year and you get to have a platform and a focus. Mm-hmm. And he decided that his focus would be positive psychology when he took office. And what's funny about that is he's a self-proclaimed grump. And in fact, at his inauguration speech, he tells a story of being in the yard. He has a bunch of kids, and his youngest child, so I think he was an older parent at this point, his youngest child is playing in the yard, and he's raking, and she's taking all the leaves that he's raking together, and she's just throwing them in the air, and he's just furious and irritated, and he just wants to get the job done. And she stops and looks at him and says, remember when I was 5 years old and y'all told me that I whined all the time and that I had to stop? Well, if I could stop whining, then you could stop being a grump. And he defines it as this pivotal moment for him where he realized 3 pretty essential things. One, that she was right. If she could stop whining, he could stop being a grump. And that 2, his role as a parent was to take her strengths and to elevate them and to help her really use them so that she could, as she came across challenges in life, that she would be able to meet them with these strengths, that he should not be squashing them or,
Yes.
denying her freedoms. And then finally was about the field of psychology, that a field that only focuses on fixing things and what's wrong is only half baked. And so he really took this idea of how do we elevate this in our culture with the happiness. Incidentally, what's so funny, after years of research, he realized that he did not have it all right. The research started to really stand out to him, and he recognized that he was missing some pretty important ingredients of the meaningful life in just focusing on happiness. And so he had already published the Authentic Happiness book, and he really had to go back to scratch and realize that what people seem to be searching for and yearning for in life is well-being. We cannot and should not be happy all the time. That would be fake. That would be false. That we're willing to work really hard at things. We're willing to be challenged. We're willing to suffer for something greater. And so a life of well-being is actually more true to human nature than anything.
I love that. It makes happiness itself just seem a little bit more like one dimension of who we are and how well-being. So talk to me about your description of well-being. What is it?
Yeah, I'm going to lean back in on Martin Seligman for this, because what he developed as he developed the well-being model was this idea of the acronym PERMA. And these are the pillars of well-being that he believes, and what the research shows, when we are focusing and activating these aspects of ourselves, that we have the greatest chance of achieving well-being and flourishing. And that starts with positive emotion. And the idea there is not you're either born with it or you're not, but that we do things to really work towards being able to create and at times sustain a sense of positive emotion. The second, engagement, that the idea that we find things that are meaningful to us that we're willing to engage in and hopefully get to have sensations like flow and just a sense of real immersement in things that matter to us. The third one, relationships, that so much of our well-being and meaning in life is completely tied back to how we experience ourselves in connection with others. And then meaning in life, the idea that we're willing to face challenge and hardship if something can truly come from it. And then finally, accomplishment, that and how we define accomplishment is so wide and vast. It can be the small things in life that we set out to achieve, or it can be the rather large things that maybe take years or most of our life to accomplish, but setting those and being conscious of what we want is such a meaningful way to live a life.
I love that. And so it's kind of like from getting from a state of happiness, or like happiness is like an emotion, right?
Yes.
Would you say it's an
I would.
emotion?
Yes.
And then to move to those pillars of well-being is like such a broader world. And maybe it allows us to just be, more of ourselves as we move through this life, instead of having a standard or expectation that like, I'm not happy enough.
Or I'm supposed to feel a certain way, right? Because you're right. I think when we're actively living the life, the life of well-being, so much of the emotion is going to come along with it. Yeah. However, that's not, when somebody is really struggling with depression, or when somebody is overcome by anxiety, a lot of intentional work has to go into cultivating those emotions. Barbara Fredrickson out of the University of North Carolina has spent her life's work really studying positive emotion and trying to understand, like, what is it that humans, how does this come to be? So from a neuroscientific point of view, like, how do we create chemicals that cause us to feel good, but also how do we live our lives in ways that really enhance the opportunity for positive emotion? And she uses the water lily as a way to explain how we experience emotion, that in the morning when water lilies spread their bloom. They're able to soak up the nutrients from both the water and from the sun. And our minds work the same way. When we steer our thoughts towards positive thinking and open ourselves up to positive emotion, we're able to soak in the good around us. And this draws people to us. It allows us to find the benefits in challenging circumstances, but it also gives us the energy to take on those uncertain parts of life that can feel really vulnerable. And, the way she talks about it is she and her research team were able to identify kind of 10 primary positive emotions that other positive emotions seem to be born out of. And just to give you a couple of examples, it's gratitude, inspiration, hope, awe, amusement. And from these, she likes to talk about the idea of this upward spiral. So often when we talk about humans and spirals, we're talking about a downward spiral, like, oh, they're going through such a downward spiral. But that's just one possibility. The idea that somebody can start a chain reaction of good things happening for themselves and for the people around is just as possible.
I love that. That feels like talking about the therapeutic process, right? As facilitators and as therapists or coaches or doctors or however we come into that healing space, to walk with that person who might be on a downward spiral and to acknowledge that, like, hey, okay, there's many different ways that we can expand from here, that we can start to nourish into that water lily that can bloom and grow and expand. I love that. So positive emotions, you just unpacked like 10 of those, right? Those are like, was her theory that everything else we feel is kind of based from those 10?
Well, in the positive realm, yes, that those are what she really considers primary. And when I say that, I think of Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, where she named 84 potential human emotions, and she really gets into the nuances with it. What she lists in her book is the range of both positive and negative, with the idea, and it's very much in sync with Barbara Fredrickson, if we can identify the emotion we are experiencing, if we can get nuanced in naming it, it gives us so much more of an understanding of what's going on from us. But then it also gives us a place to work from there. Once we understand it, then there's all sorts of potential of what we do to enhance it if we want more of it, to help ourselves work through and let go or accept if it's something that causes more struggle.
Yes. And so it's kind of a process of studying our own emotions when you're working with someone.
And really getting to know the self, right?
Yes.
And I think that is such a fascinating piece in this work, that therapy is so organic, right? When we sit down, when we sit in this space, there is not an agenda. There's not a set list of questions. I mean, this is so intuitive. And yes, as a therapist, it is my job to lean in on the theory and to understand where I might guide us. But really, it's two humans coming together and trying to figure it out. And I think one of the things that just naturally starts to surface up in the work that is so powerful is people's strengths. And as we start to tap into the organic, natural strengths that humans possess, and we can use assessment tools if it is really a struggle to figure them out. Oftentimes we don't need those because it just starts to surface up. And then that becomes such a powerful tool in trying to pull out positive emotion and experiences and challenges based on those strengths.
So would you say that in a real life example, working with a client, that they might be experiencing some of those positive emotions without recognizing them?
Well, I don't know that our culture really teaches us and encourages us to understand when something is happening within us that is feels really good. But also when we are using our strengths in a way that is causing the good things in our lives to happen, like that is just something that we are not always conscious about.
Right.
And so to just create awareness, I mean, to look at the relationships in one's life that are really working and why is that? And to look at the aspects of work and school that are working. Well, that's not just happening. That person is doing something to activate the good that exists. There's something to work with there and for us to pay attention to.
I
And
love
that's,
that.
and I think it's also so important in focusing on that to point out that positive psychology is not looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, right? Trauma happens.
Right.
Really difficult things happen in life. There's, loss and grief and things that we have to sit with to be able to steer back into the positive. So I don't want to diminish that or belittle that because it's all so real, but it's not the end of the story.
Right. It's a part of the story.
It's a part of the story.
And so what you just made me realize is that a client walking through that experience of depression or anxiety or PTSD, that they are having a whole life experience that includes upward spirals in it that could be simple, like, you made yourself breakfast this morning.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We get to define what a step towards, self-care or putting more energy into living again is, right? And so that is, I think that is something that we want to be so conscious of, that this is not, once again, this is not coming from a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
When we're really working to understand the challenges that someone's facing, as you get to know the client, it's so obvious what those successes are. And it is so real and fun and joyful to celebrate them as they're happening.
Yes. And I would say, it's easy. Yeah, it's like there's an easy component to that, right? We're just kind of missing it sometimes, or we're skipping right past it to focus on the hard stuff. But how nice it is to sit back and relax for a minute and to really soak in, like, the things that are actually working.
Oh, yeah, I think it's so true. As humans, we just have a tendency to complicate things. And that makes so much sense, right? We have our brains, causing us to think. We have our whole central nervous system, the amygdala, all the parts of our body that help us to feel. We have our physical body causing us to behave. Like, there is so much that causes it to be complicated. So that is understandable and real. But I think so often when we can take things back to simple truths and simple ways to care for the self, we find our way through what can sometimes feel like chaos.
Yes, totally. The chaos that I can closely relate to in my field of practice is that repetitive pain cycle, the pain that won't go away, and where a person's attention and focus and life energy is going towards, describing that pain or getting that pain diagnosed, seeking medical attention for, and on, so that it can consume all of their well-being, gets sucked away.
And how hard it is to focus on any other aspect of well-being when your body is suffering.
Right. And so what you're making me think of right now in this discussion is a strategy we use. Like you're saying, it's very organic, but it's coming from, a patient's abilities. It's identifying their abilities. Okay, so we'll talk about things that they cannot do, like bend down and lift the laundry, for instance. But we don't want to bypass all of those things that they can do. They can take a walk. They can go to the toilet independently. They can care for their child independently. So it's like those upward spirals are occurring in their life through that experience of chronic pain, darkness, depression, and on and on.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. And you're right. Recognizing what is working so we can build
Yeah.
from there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so would you say that's kind of that simple way of understanding positive psychology? Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
I love that. So talk to me a little bit about, oh, I wanted to go back to PERMA real quick, the
Sure.
pillars.
Mm-hmm.
So we said positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning in life, and accomplishment. So to me, those pillars could be assessed and looked at no matter what the person's going through.
Yes, absolutely. Whether it be a physical struggle, an emotional struggle, a struggle in cognitions, which can cause so much anxiety. But you're right, it's relevant across the board to
Right.
humans.
Yeah, totally. Like and so on building on those pillars, then are we kind of, is the process teasing out, like let's take relationships, that pillar. So is it teasing out what's working in our relationships that are flourishing instead of focusing on like the dysfunctional
Well, it's
pattern?
not one or the other, right? If in at any moment in therapy we're working through different lenses. So if we're working through the lens of positive psychology, yes, we're thinking about the relationships that cause true oxytocin release, that chemical that women release so much of right after giving birth, and the idea that we do things in our relationship to allow our brains to release that particular chemical. And, things like Robert Emmons out of Florida has done a ton of research on gratitude practicing and the impact of gratitude practicing on raising our oxytocin, but also lowering our cortisol. So
Yes.
the idea that so much of gratitude practicing has to do with really cultivating sensations about our relationships with other people. For instance, the self-compassion letter, which is a gratitude practice. I'm sorry, not self-compassion. I'll go back to that in a second. The writing the gratitude letter, which is the idea that you think of somebody in your life that has really had an influence, a meaning, a purpose, and expressing that. And then so much research on the benefits of that. Sonia Lubermisky out of UC Riverside took it a little bit further and studied what happens when people actually deliver the letter to the person they wrote it to. And right there's like a spike in the ability to sustain all that comes from that feels good. So the things that we can do to really celebrate our relationships with others. But then back to that notion of the self-compassion letter, that's celebrating the relationship with the self too. Being able to generate feelings of understanding and compassion and acceptance towards the self, because it is so easy to live in a place of self-criticism and judgment. But how is the body supposed to heal, and how are we supposed to enhance well-being if we're doing what is actually a self-protective, oddly enough, behavior of just trying to keep ourselves in a box of self-criticism?
Yes. So, we hit on the amygdala. We didn't go far into that territory, but I want you to kind of tie that concept together, that fear or protective self. So, I'm thinking about this analogy with pain, that we would want to avoid the thing that causes the pain, right? If it's like, when I bend forward, my back hurts, so I'm no longer going to bend forward, and we lose that motion. And all we're trying to do is like prevent it from happening.
It's protective. Yeah, it's human nature, right? To try to protect against things that are hard and put us at risk.
Exactly. And did you say that like our critical part of ourselves is a protective feature?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Dick Schwartz, the founder of internal family systems theory, which is, I think, a theory that really speaks to me and I've just enjoyed learning about so much. He and his work primarily was with eating disordered patients. And what he grew to realize through many years of practice was that people would get better, right? They would learn how to take better care of their bodies. They would get better. But there was unfortunately this revolving door that they would become sick again and they would find themselves back in his clinic again. And he really hit the wall and felt frustration, as we sometimes need to do when we're trying to really understand something. And so he started to listen to patients in a new way and started to really try to understand, like, what is the role of this eating disorder? And from that, internal family systems theory was birthed. And it's a amazing theory, but to just like kind of boil it down and to just a couple sentences, it is the idea that all humans we're all made up of so many different parts. We have really vulnerable parts, and this, that we are working to protect, and then we have protective parts. And these protective parts come on strong at times, subtle at others, but they are designed, and it is their job to try to keep us out of harm's way. And incidentally, they sometimes protect in ways that can create other problems. They're funny like that. And so just that example of I'm going to be protective and not lean over because it's going to hurt and I don't want to hurt. But the idea that it might somehow along the way stunt future capacity or ability, well, the protective part isn't able to see that full big picture. It is able to see what it's protecting in the moment. Right. But when we can understand that, there's so much opportunity then to work out of judgment and criticism and a place into gratitude that these parts inside of us, they want the best for us, but sometimes we have to work with them to open up and loosen up in ways that allow us to have the vast experiences that we want to have with living.
Beautiful. Understanding that all of those roles of all those distinct parts are necessary at certain times, right?
And we should have respect for them, right? Even if they're causing some difficulties, even if there's a real struggle, because the way through them and the way to change them is through understanding.
Yes, absolutely. The knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and empowerment process for an individual to be able to learn, oh yeah, there's all this unexplored territory that I never quite unpacked or saw, at a depth that I needed to be seeing to
Absolutely.
be able to work with that.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, okay, I want to come back to the water lily, because when you described the water lily of bringing in nourishment and being able to grow, it made me think of like resilience, right? Like we're kind of growing into our resilient self.
Yeah, that is an actual, a huge piece of positive psychology, funny enough, right? Because resilience is all about struggle. And as we said a little bit ago, part of what we are designed to do is to, at times, we are hardwired in our brains to keep ourselves safe. That is primal. And therefore, sometimes we want to turn away from struggle. And yet there is so much to come from resilience and grit and taking on challenges in life that don't feel comfortable, that stretch us, that cause us to be vulnerable, and then to really grow from there. That the idea that inside the struggle, we are going to learn things about ourselves that we just never knew were possible. And that, to go back to the idea of human relationships, when we are in our struggle, because we are trying to grow in some way, what's interesting, a nice byproduct of this, is it actually causes us to connect with other humans in pro-social ways, that we become more humble, that we start to understand other people's vulnerability in a way that maybe we don't when we are feeling our most competent. It makes us better humans, but it makes us better people to be in relationship with too. So a life of challenge and a life of struggle is so important in so many different ways.
Oh, I love what you just said, because that's real life. That's everyone's real course of life, the ups and downs and the twists and turns and getting all turned around, right? And finding your way through those struggles. And I feel like our overculture is, what is it about it? We want to Do we have this cultural view that struggle is bad?
I recently got to work with a group of teenagers at an all-girls school, and we had a full workshop on what is perfectionism.
Oh, yeah.
And what is so fascinating in the research on perfectionism is that very little of it is about doing everything perfectly. That's not even really what it's about. What it really typically comes down to is this self-prescribed need to be a certain way so that others will approve of us.
Yes.
Because, and this goes back to that primal need for human connection that wired in us is the need for that. And so we can create these ideas of what we think the world needs from us in order to be worthy, good enough, able to accomplish everything that we think we're supposed to accomplish. But if we can just understand, what that's really about is needing positive human connection. We can then work from a place where we start to work out of feeling like you're supposed to be perfect, you're not supposed to struggle, you're supposed to look this way, you're supposed to conduct your life this way, it's supposed to be clean and tidy all the time, because that's just a lie, right? Like, that's just impossible. We're humans.
Right.
We are, and we come with all of our messes and all of our vulnerabilities and our strengths, but our weaknesses too. And that's just so real. It's so okay.
Yes. But I think you said something so important just now, that deeper underlying human need for positive connections with others. Let's go in there a little bit.
Yeah. Loneliness is such a despairing struggle that so many humans have to grapple with. I think we have to disarm loneliness and recognize that that is something that all humans will feel at various points in their life. It doesn't mean that something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shame embedded in loneliness, but it's part of the human experience. And it's an important emotion because it informs us on something that we need to go seek out. And, we, at different moments in our life, have accessibility to varying forms of relationships. And sometimes people really do find themselves not experiencing enough of the human connection that we need. This is another time where we weave back to simplicity, that there is research that shows that going into the grocery store and having a positive encounter with the person who is helping you by checking you out, that has the potential to change brain chemistry in a way that is good for us.
Yes.
So, I think that in times of isolation, we have to get really creative about what can we do to fill this need, this very human need for positive connection.
Yes, I love how you tied it back into our biology and how we're hardwired, right? Because if we're low on serotonin, if we're low on oxytocin, I know you could walk us through that in much more detail, but I'm saying in general, if our hormones and our neurotransmitters are low, the ones that make us feel good, then it's almost like these interventions can be biologically helpful. Going to the grocery and having that positive interaction, calling the friend, having a girls' night out. So we can think of those social interactions as like medicine for those low neurotransmitters.
Yeah, Sonia Lubomirsky has a great research study called Random Acts of Kindness, where she had, a group of people that were instructed to go out and conduct 3 random acts of kindness in addition to what you would normally do in a week. And then the control group was asked to do things for the self. So do 3 extra things for yourself this week. And when they compared the data on getting out there and doing things for other people, it was astonishing not only how it created a sense of fulfillment and connection, and even just understanding the vastness of the world, right? Being able to step outside of yourself to agree, that can be very helpful to us, but that it's sustained for a long weeks and weeks after the research was conducted. And so this idea that we can take deliberate steps in our daily lives that just give us those little boosts that you're talking about with those chemicals that we need in order to be able to experience well-being.
Yeah, totally. And you're breaking it down in really simple ways like that. So,
Which I think is so important when people are struggling with loneliness, because I think sometimes we think the cure for that has to be, I have to be in this deep relationship with somebody else that's going to fill me up and give me so much. And while that is wonderful to have when you can have it, we have to be honest and realistic that doesn't feel accessible to every human. And so let's work with what we've got.
yes, that's amazing. I want to write down a little tag of research for myself to follow up on about loneliness and states of the physical body too. You know, how loneliness can be connected to feelings of despair, or it can keep us in the house and immobilized even.
And make it harder to take risks, right? Like so much of what we have to do to work out of mental health challenges is, and I think, one of the things that the poor people I work with probably get so sick of hearing me say, but I think it's just so real and true, is the cruel thing about depression and debilitating anxiety is at a time in your life when you feel the least capable, you have the least amount of energy, your motivation is depleted, your hope is zilch. The way out of it is to crawl from the backseat of your life into the front seat and drive out of it. That's cruel and that is hard.
Yeah.
And it's these little acts that we can do that start to build a momentum out of it. And so we have to start realistic and small, but we have to also be honest and real that unfortunately depression and anxiety quite often don't solve themselves.
Yes. I think what you said, you just said a whole lot there with that lack of motivation that can come along with that. And how do you get in the driver's seat and drive out of it? Can you name some of those simple steps that you might really emphasize in a session with a patient who's really struggling? Like, okay, it may not seem like this would be helpful or effective, but this simple step to engage in can really lay down the pathway for you to get in the driver's seat.
I am a big follower of the Huberman Lab, and so I find myself quite often quoting him or referring people to parts of his podcast. But I do think being outdoors, I think getting out into nature, even if let's take somebody who is really in a major depressive episode, struggling to get out of bed, to be able to go from the bed to the outdoors, to just stand in the yard, to feet in the grass, looking up at the sun, getting that morning stimulation. There's such a power in a less than 5-minute exercise.
Yes.
Of getting outdoors. I think it's huge. And I think it's part of how we, our primal wiring, we are connected to the earth. And so the earth, it has so much of what we need in order to feel good again. I did a certification program with Run, Walk, Talk out of the Los Angeles area. And so much of the neuroscience we looked at in that training was wrapped up in just getting outside and walking and talking. Our central nervous system is so responsive to that.
Yes.
So maybe for somebody really struggling, that is walking around a backyard. But what a beautiful thing to be able to do for yourself to start to feel a state of calm again.
Yeah, and that's something that is accessible, right? So for most of everyone, it's not something that you have to buy, or it's not something you have to wait in line for an appointment to get. You can just simply, like you said, step outside and let that connection with nature work its magic with our internal hormones and our systems that we're built with. So that's really beautiful. And if that person could experience just a glimmer from that, enough to have the motivation to do it the next day and the next day to build a pattern, is that how do you see a client coming through and progressing?
Well, and I think all the research on gratitude practices really helps us to understand how neural pathways are changed through habitual behaviors. And one of my favorite things about this is that these practices, whether it's a gratitude practice or an awe practice, these are practices that take sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes 2 minutes. But what we know is every time that those practices are engaged, new neural pathways are strengthened in the brain.
Yes.
And that over time, and this is the whole idea behind neuroplasticity, that the brain adapts and changes to them. I have a daughter learning to play the guitar right now. When I think about how in the beginning, when she's starting to really work on a new song, it is a struggle, and she has to keep working and work. It's relentless work to start to even make it sound like a song. But over time, new neural pathways are being created, and she's able to really pull it together. Well, I think we can think of the way we cultivate thinking and emotions the same way. Hebb's law, the idea, the way I love to describe Hebb's law is think of your brain as a forest. And, if you were to start to walk down a path in a forest where a path has never been walked, it's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to feel natural. You're going to trip and fall. But as you continue to walk down that same path, the path clears itself, and it becomes easy, and it becomes seamless, and you don't even have to struggle through it any longer. Our brains, that's how, neuroplasticity works. And so if we are cultivating these ideas of, something that can feel good, something that we're grateful for, that practice of all. Dr. Keltner just came out with his book a couple of years ago on all this research about taking 10 seconds to notice some beauty in the world or in a relationship, that right there changes these neural pathways and helps us to start thinking and feeling in new and different ways. And that never goes away. Right?
Yeah.
That human potential will be with us. Yes, it's at its strongest up until our 20s, but it never leaves us.
Absolutely.
And there's so much hope in that.
Oh, yeah. And that I feel like is such a gift, right? From practitioner to client, that relationship that you can give hope just because of the way we're literally designed.
Yeah, there's fact. It's fact, right? there is science behind it.
Yeah, and understanding that science, even its objectivity, the way that neuroscience works, we've understood so much more about it. We have so much more to understand and gain in knowledge still. But as we can kind of have that simple understanding of this is the way my brain works, then I feel like that is a motivator in and of itself, right?
Absolutely. To feel empowered,
Yeah.
to be able to change the wiring that, we all come into this earth with a temperament, right? And then life happens. And so oftentimes when we find ourselves in hopeless and pessimistic thinking, it's because life has handed us some challenges, and maybe that sort of thinking is our way of protecting ourselves, that we sort of lose faith in the ability for good things to happen, or starts to feel too risky to be optimistic about a better future. And so it is understandable how humans get there, but it's very possible to also work out of that place too.
Yeah, and I think you said something really important about the risk taking. How would you promote a person to take a small risk?
Yeah, because
so
and we're
they can
talking
grow?
about positive,
Yeah.
small risk. Often these are things that make us feel very nervous and vulnerable. So I think when let's take the risk of maybe engaging a social outing that isn't something that you would normally do, but you want it for yourself because there's a potential. Maybe you'll get closer with some people that you've wanted to know more. Maybe you'll meet somebody new, but what a huge vulnerability to put yourself out there in new ways. And so I think a huge piece of this is sitting with the fact that it feels really hard. Like, I am
Yes.
taking a risk, and that is brave, and I'm going to support myself through it. And if I need to go to the bathroom and close the stall door and breathe for a moment and acknowledge how hard it is, I will do that. And I will accept the challenge, and I'm going to take care of myself through it. And maybe I'm not going to love it. Maybe it's going to feel really hard, but the relief that can come from knowing that you've taken a risk. How often I will hear clients say, it was so hard to do it, but afterwards I felt so good about the fact that I had done it. Like, that, once again, something to feel so much joy over. And
Yes.
and even if it's hard to feel joy, to realize, like, that was brave.
Yes. And what an accomplishment then.
What an
too.
accomplishment. And we, as humans, tend to build positive risk taking off positive risk taking. If you do one, then it just makes it a little bit easier to do it the next time. How often do you hear people say, like, oh, I really didn't want to go do this thing. I had to pull myself off the couch. I had to pull myself out of the house. I did not want to do it. I'm so glad I did.
Yes.
Because they took a risk.
Totally. I love that. And being able to navigate sometimes out of our worst times in life, right? From a place where we're protective, and then we can slowly unfold with some bravery and with some courage and inject that into that risk, building what those neurons are going to need.
Absolutely.
To grow.
And an essential piece in that is, something doesn't go right. We have a tendency as humans to just like replay it, think about it, really wedge in some new neural pathways about it. We have a tendency as humans, when things go well, to kind of glide over them and then to move on to the next challenge. And we have to sit in really, really acknowledging what we have done so that we can build capacity from there. We have to really stall, pause, reflect, journal, talk about, daydream about the things that we are doing that are moving us in a more positive way.
That is amazing. Okay, so all of our listeners, if you just take what Lauren just said and make it into your homework about really deeply reflecting on a positive accomplishment or a small risk that you took, or that time that you noticed like there was so much beauty, like there was the gorgeous rose that you walked by on the sidewalk. So soaking that in, can you underline for us, like, why is that important for our brains to soak that in and to stop and stay there in some gratitude and some feeling good about ourselves?
Yeah, just leaning back on the research that was shared in that book on awe, that when we take 10 seconds to recognize the beauty or the mystery, or in any moment that we're in, that we are able to lower our cortisol levels, we are able to step out of our everyday problems and recognize that maybe that thing that you're really hung up on, that fear of judgment of somebody else, that worry you didn't do something good enough, when we step out and look at the bigger world, look at the beauty, look at nature, allow the mystery of amazing music to take over us, all of a sudden, we can put those things in perspective. The fear of the judgment of others, not so powerful. That thing that we think we just really messed up, that's, in 24 hours, how much is it actually going to matter? These things are perspective makers. And that's a major tool that we need to navigate the everyday struggles of life.
That is awesome. I feel like you just broke down in like a scientific and clinical way what my parents would tell me, like growing up, like if something hard happened or if I was down on myself, like, it's okay, Kelly. They would say something to help boost my spirit so that it helped to give me perspective.
Okay, so what you are saying is, I find this so funny because I think so much of positive psychology research is just validating what we already know, right?
Yes.
Like, your parents, from a very intuitive place, knew what you needed so that they could help you build on your strengths and your capacity. And yeah, the science is great because now we've got the data and the proof, but it is so funny. It just comes back to being human.
Yeah, and the intuitive piece of that is hopeful too, right? Because you don't have to study all the texts. You don't have to go to all the courses on happiness, although wouldn't I love to sit in a course on happiness? That would be wonderful. But you don't really have to do all the tools and measures. You can intuitively work on this process of transforming, guilt, shame, critical thinking. And so let's say, how would a person listening identify if they need professional help to be able to work on some of that building up the positive psychology?
Yeah, that's a great question. So often people will come in and they will, as we're really trying to unpack what their story is, their narrative, it's often people really do work hard to feel better. People do well when they can. Mm-hmm. And so I think it is, I think when a sense of hopelessness starts to set in, really hopefully people come into therapy way before that, right? But I think, the idea that there are times when we really need to pay attention, like I can't do this on my own, is when a loss of hope, when life starts to get really small, right? You're not living as largely as an individual wants for themselves. If setting goals and attaining them all of a sudden feels impossible, no matter what the size of those goals are, that if more days are spent feeling really awful than not, and you've tried to work out of it and it's just not working. Mm-hmm. I think that these are, we don't want humans to suffer alone. And it's not that therapy, you're going to walk into therapy and things are going to get fixed, but there is this idea that we're going to really create a network of support and understanding and a non-judgmental space so that we can really start to understand why did it get stuck and how do we work out of it.
Yes, that's beautiful. And being able to welcome in a person right where they are, meet them in their vulnerability, and using all of your knowledge and skills and tools that you have available to you through your background and training and experience. It's really incredible that, like you said before, the individual is so dynamic and so unique in their own walk of wherever they are. That intuitive process unfolds and you're able to help to give them hope and give them some tools, maybe some little risk-taking homework, maybe some, confidence in themselves that there can be a process to just get some traction and head forward, have some connection with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think my favorite part about therapy is that they have the answers inside of themselves. They do. It just, when life gets really challenging, it's really hard to reach that part of yourself and to pull up that authentic self that can guide you through. So we're just clearing a space so people can connect with that part of them again.
And again and again. Yeah. And then they learn how to do that, right? That's amazing. How would people get in touch with you to be able to work with you?
So I do have a website, laurengehman.com. That's probably the easiest way. And my contact information, whether they want to email or call, is there. That's Gehman.
Awesome. And we are located at our office space. We're located in Lakeview in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I know mostly you're in person, Lauren, but do you do virtual telehealth?
I do. I didn't, like everybody else, we didn't realize how accessible that can make therapy for people. So it's such an important part of how we do therapy now. So that is one way. And then I also meet people by the lake and for the run, walk, talk therapy, which is mostly walking. And the person who trained us said, walk is its middle name for a reason. Most people prefer that. But it's a great way to do therapy at sunrise or sunset out on the water, which has such a calming effect. So.
That is wonderful. We really appreciate our location in Lakeview because we are, minutes from Lake Pontchartrain.
It's a great place to take a break.
Yes, great place to take a break, great place to walk and talk, get some therapy in, and get that nature dose in. Lauren, is there anything else you want to add to our talk tonight?
Just so grateful to be able to sit and connect on something that I'm so passionate about, that you're so passionate about. And, I think that at the end of the day, this is all about human connection. So I'm so glad we got to connect on this.
Absolutely.
So
thank you so much. I really appreciate you unpacking those principles and giving us more of an insider's look into positive psychology and the ways that can impact our well-being. Thank you.
Thank you.